This is a two-day event. The panelists come up here and they're crawling up here very carefully. Make sure you be careful, especially. And then I'm gonna go down.
Put you right here in the very front.
In the very front.
Does that work? Or you want somewhere else?
What about on the air so not right where in everybody's way?
Well, you won't be in anybody's way here.
You're not, you can sit wherever you want.
Our two-panel discussion.
And no one comes up and down here.
Christians against canonization.
This is good.
Valentin Lopez.
Yeah.
Juliana Roli Sanchez. Donna Schindler. Mary Valdemar. Greg Cotton. And Shashim Littlefeather. So let's come back in. But you see, I see some of the seats reserved for Chumash elders. So if there are not any seats, you can sit there once the elders have returned. This is a part of a two-day affair of Sarah Hinglo Saint. The panel discussion, and then later on a youth concert in the Casa de la Raza, and tomorrow a ceremony. A ceremony to honor the answers at the mission, followed by a community feed, you might say, community get together with food and expressions that people they can express themselves at the casa along with eating. So this is a two-day event. What's in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, is a big banner with lots of signatures. This banner is an expression of what these panelists have been talking about and what the panelists are going to present. And this is all the young people, old people, middle-aged people, women, men, children that have signed this that are opposed and want the Pope Francis to respect our communities. And each one person, many people don't have a chance to speak. Many people don't have a chance to sing. Many people don't have a chance to be the main organizers or the people or medicine people that are going to pray. In our way, thanks to the American Union of Southern California, came up with this idea. And all these people asked for feedback. We want individual, this is going to go to today. If anybody hasn't signed it, sign whatever thoughts you might want to express. And then in turn, it'll be tonight at the concert, youth concert fundraiser. And then finally at the mission itself. So this is a manner in which we are passing around. And this is your opportunity to sign, to be aware of this. And so thank you very much.
Okay, you guys can take it. It's going to be outside on the table. If you haven't signed it, please do. It was with us at Mission Carmel. It's going to be with us this weekend, and you can express yourself any way you want. So thank you. I also wanted to introduce Ms. Candice Perez, who wanted to, because of Poder Santa Barbara, they donated this awesome lunch that we had today. I want to say thank you to her, and if she wants to see
Candice, would you come over here? Come over here. Sit down here.
Thank you for a couple minutes of your time. It's great to see everybody here today. Like Karine said, I'm with Poder Santa Barbara. Poder stands for People Organized for the Defense and Equal Rights of Santa Barbara. We're a totally volunteer organization, and when we heard about the events that AIM and the Chumash were putting on this weekend, we felt that, well, the things that we struggle for our communities,
think all the panelists are here, and then in turn I'll hand the mic over to the next moderator for the panel 2, Catholics and Christians Against Canonization. I'll hand it over to Valentin Lopez. Before that, I want to, since everyone's here, talk about this is a 2-day event. The first is our panel discussion, and then in turn we're going to have Indigenous Youth Resistance Concert, the fundraiser to possibly send California Indian peoples to the with Val to either the Vatican or where the Pope's going to show up on the East Coast, Washington D.C., in order to talk about these very issues. So that's the concert. It's going to be very exciting concert. You can look at the Independent, but also we have the different groups. I'll name them real quickly. They're going to be Atlan Underground, Unit F, Chiwas, Love the Messenger, Red Star, Monkey House, local Chumash group, and also, I know about Chumash few singers, and I believe Ohlone traditional singers too, and they're all doing this, and it was this, the youth concert was the brainchild of Casmali and Chimoy Lopez, and they wanted to do something to bring it back to our community. So, and then finally, with the help of America, and you move to Southern California, I asked all these individuals, so I pulled all this concert together, and then finally working with Raquel at the Casa de Casa, we made this possible. So we're very fortunate that we have that night, so the young people and young at heart can enjoy the music and have a voice within our community. We don't do many things in consideration of youth, so this is just part of that. And then finally at the mission, at 1 o'clock, we're going to have the prayer for our ancestors. That will be from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. That will be at the mission grave site, mass grave site. And after that, then we'll go to the Casa de la Raza. At 4:30, begin the food and also some social commentary of individuals would like to do that. That area will be monitored also. And the same rules of conduct will apply to the bill as well as the ceremony and also to the Casa de la Raza. So that's the background of this. Without further ado, I'd like to turn over the mic as a moderator for panel 2, Catholic and Christian Against Canonization, Valentin Lopez, Chairman of the Mutsun Tribal Band of Coslon Ohlone Indians. Give a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Marcus. Once again, my name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Alta California Tribal Band. It's my pleasure and privilege to moderate this panel titled Catholics and Christians Against Canonization. Yes, I was a Catholic. I was also an altar boy for 8 or 9 years, and I was very devout in my beliefs and my followings. My mother was not Catholic up until the time she had her 3rd child. And she rented an apartment where the landlord told her, "You need to go to church." And she was trying to get her to go to one of her, she was Baptist, I don't know what religion she was. But my mom said our people always went to Catholic church, and she's going to go to Catholic church. And so she started going to Catholic church, and that's how we came to Catholic church. It's not like we were with them from the time of the missions. We have other folks here who are prepared to talk about Catholics against Christians, excuse me, Catholics and Christians against canonization. Catholics against canonization. We're going to follow the format that we had this morning. We have 5 speakers. We're going to give them 15 minutes each. Please be careful of the time and pay attention to the time. And then following that, we will have time for questions and answers, okay? Or maybe questions that we'll see what we can do with the answers. Our first speaker is Shasheen Littlefeather. Shasheen is Apache Yaqui and a Native American elder and activist.
know when you're becoming an elder when your friends lead you a name tag, so you know who you are. In case you get lost, you can now be put in the lost and found. My name is Sasheen Cruz Littlefeather. My father was a full-blood Indian, and my mother was white. Therefore, I'm half Indian and half savage. For those of you who are awake, I'm glad you caught that. If you're asleep, go back. Many people have called me many things in my lifetime, but they have never said to me, "Gee, Sasheen, you're looking awfully Caucasian today." That is one comment I have never gotten. I was born, first of all, a female, a human being, and then an Indian. I was baptized later a Catholic. I am first and foremost an Indian. I know who I am. That being said, I come from tribes in the Southwest who were missionized like the California Indian people here have been missionized by the Spanish missionaries. Thank you so much for your beautiful songs this morning, and for your prayers, and for welcoming us to your land, to your place here in Santa Barbara. I really appreciate it very much. I'm sitting amongst you, and I very humbly appreciate the greetings that you have given to me. They mean so much here in the heart, because we Indian people resonate from the heart. This is our homeland, no matter where we go or where we come from. Being Catholic has been part of my identity. Receiving the sacraments of communion, going to confession, and I filled her ears all today. No, I'm just kidding. And having received absolution as part of the sacraments from a priest, and receiving confirmation, and going forth in my journey as a Catholic, has been something that I have journeyed through in my lifetime. But now it brings me very great sorrow to hear and to see and to know that Junipero Serra is becoming a saint. Someone that to me represents a Hitler to the native peoples. If someone were to say to the Jewish people, "We're going to make Hitler a saint," what do you think about that? I'm sure they would say nothing doing. And I feel and think the same way. As a matter of fact, 3 weeks ago, traveling here from Northern California, 3 weeks ago I was in my Communitas Christi group that I belonged to for the last 25 years. And during the middle of a Mass with a Jesuit priest, he said to everyone, "And what else should we pray for?" And I said during the middle of the Mass that Junipero Serra not be made a saint. For all California Native Indian people shall be heard. And I said, the voiceless shall be heard. We shall not be treated as children, not seen and not heard. For I've read all of these articles about Pope Francis by Associated Press, and it says basically, Native Americans have protested in California saying the friars should be criticized for what they contend was his role in wiping out native populations. In a campaign to impose Catholicism, they contend he enslaved converts, and that missionaries like him helped spread diseases like smallpox, which disseminated their people. And I contend that they are part of the problem of genocide. I contend that the miracle that took place during these times is a California Native people survived. That's the miracle. The second miracle is that they would even think to make Junipero Serra a saint. And as a dear friend once told me, how can you pray to a saint who is in hell? Paying for the sins that he did to all Native people. Absolutely amazing. I pray to Jesus, but I also believe in my Native American religion. I'm a member of Native American Church. I believe in the Native American tradition. If you hear the sound of each of our hearts, that is the sound of our heartbeat. All living things have that heartbeat, all the animals. We are one. We are in that circle of life with all living things. Our traditions and our culture teach us this. Our tradition is the most modern belief system in the world, and yet it is thousands of years old. We are people with a culture, a tradition, and a history. We knew the earth was round long time ago, before these people came over, these so-called pilgrims that reached our shore. And you want to know that these people thought that the earth was not round, but we knew everything was in a circle, because that's our tradition. Things are always in a circle. Things are balanced with us, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical way of life, always in balance, until the white people came over here to our shores to throw everything out of sync and out of balance. Our relationship with our Creator and us are one. And that's our heritage and that's our tradition. Until that religion was brought over here, not only to take our lives, but also to destroy our value system. When I was sitting here listening to the other speakers this morning, I thought about the historical umbrella of genocide of my own experience, being born underneath of that umbrella of alcoholism, of domestic violence, of sexual abuse, of poverty, of tuberculosis. All of those things, that is the historical, traumatic, genocidal acts of not being valued, of being marginal in a dominant society. And I said, where did this come from? This came from these people who came over here and put their values upon us. And I said to myself, I'm going back to my traditional ways, because there's my answer. That's where I'll find the love of myself, is through that good red road. And I combined that good red road and Catholicism Catholicism. I took from Catholicism what I wanted, what worked for me. I wrote a little piece. I'm looking at my time. I asked, what would Jesus do? Jesus was a good person. He was a good man. I heard my ancestors ask, what would Jesus do if he were here? Would Jesus enslave us and force us under penalty of death to believe the way that they do? Would he treat us with cruelty and genocide and steal our land and forbid us from speaking our tribal languages and tell us that we are heathen savages who have no creator? What would Jesus do and say if he saw the missionaries, the Spanish, do all these things in his most precious name? Would Jesus cry for those who slaughtered us and tortured us and forced us to give up our own language and culture, native religion, belief system, in his most holy name? Would Jesus be ashamed of those who colonized us and took away our children at a young age to Indian missionary schools, against our will, never to see our families again? Would Jesus bleed one more time to see the alienation and the Holocaust of desecration of multitudes of tribes of human beings, against the all-powerful colonial missionizing of Jesus and the influence thereof, of complete devastation used against my people as our bodies lay buried across this North American continent? Would Jesus weep with us and cry with us as we lay one generation after another to rest on this holy ground, that of our ancestors? To remember the dead that were sacrificed in his most holy name? What would Jesus do if he were here? Thank you.
Thank you, Shasheen. That was beautiful. Asking a really important question. What would Jesus do? Jesus would not come in with the military. He would not control us with whipping. Jesus was about love and forgiveness. And I think that's why most of us are Catholics today. Because that was the message that we looked for. The message of love and the message of forgiveness. And that was beautiful, Shasheen. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Georgiana Boloisi Sanchez, who's Chumash Oldham Elder, Abominable Chumash Council, and a retired American Indian Studies at CSU Long Beach. Please give a warm hand of welcome to Georgiana.
I've been telling everyone that when the first words out of my mouth were going to be, what the hell am I doing on this table? But then I thought, it's a good place to kind of talk about the journey that many of us have gone through and are going through right now. My father was born in 1897. He was baptized at the Mission San Luis Rey. My grandmother was baptized in Santa Barbara. We have many of our people buried in La Purísima, Mission Buenaventura. My great-grandmother is buried at Mission Buenaventura. And most of us were baptized around Santa Barbara, except Dad. They had moved down south, and he was baptized at Mission San Luis Rey. His father was hurt. The mother left the family, and his father hurt himself very badly and could not take care of his children. And there were 4 children left. The only child that went with my grandmother was a baby by the name of Georgiana. So when I was born, my father named me Georgiana, and she is buried at Mesa Grande on the Kumeyaay Reservation. My father, during that time in the orphanage, my father was treated very badly. He said he was about almost 5. He was there for 18 months, and he was taught to fear God. And he used to tell us when we were growing up, if the devil didn't get you, God would. So he didn't marry by the church. He never, my mother insisted that we be baptized, and he went along with it. But any other sacraments, he did not want us to be part of. In those days they called it catechism, because he was afraid that we would learn about that punishing, awful God. When my dad came out of the orphanage, he said before he went, the only thing he was afraid of was an old goose and a gander who would chase him all around the yard. But he said when he got back, he would sit at the table with his head down, waiting to be told to speak or to eat. And I think there may have been other things that happened to him in that orphanage, where they had a lot of mixed blood boys, and it was very difficult. So my dad did not want us to become part of the Catholic Church or to learn about what he saw as a very negative view of God and creation and just how life works. He just did not want it for us at all. Well, I was about 8 years old, and I remember standing in front of my dad, and he was reading as usual. And you had to wait till my dad stopped reading. He was a tough old guy. And then finally he looks up over his glasses, like, yes. I go, Dad, I think it's time for me to make my first communion. And then he gives me this piercing look, like he could, you know, the kind of look that would shut you up across the room. You know, but he never hit us. My dad was, I mean, the way my dad punished us was by lecturing, which was worse. I wanted to say, just hit me and get it over with. So my dad had respect for us as human beings. And he said, he's asking me about it. And then I said, I know my prayers, and I already went to see the priest. Like, I was always a rebel. And if they didn't want me to do it, then I wanted to do it. And so I went, and the priest was very intrigued with me, and he said, all right, come on, we'll take you to the classes. Little did I know that they had gone through all the classes, weeks of classes. I only had 2 more classes to go to before I made my communion. So I missed all the guts and blood and suffering and hell and pain and God. I missed all that stuff because they were getting ready, I think, for Christmas or something. So I got like all the good stuff. And I remember being in the church, this little girl, and I go, wow, God always was and always will be. That blew my mind. I'd say it over and over, God always. You know, but it's not like I hadn't heard it before, because my parents had told us about how, you know, they were way ahead of their time as far as God is love or, you know, all of that. They came from a very centered place, a place of looking at God as this loving, creative life force, and that it blossomed forth in all of creation. And so my father would look and question, well, like, what did they tell you? What did they do? So what he was teaching me is to be a critical thinker. Don't accept everything they're telling you, because then he'd tell me again, because, you know, and then he'd go on and he'd tell us stories. For instance, when his father was dying, they sent a neighbor to go run for the priest for the last rites. And the priest didn't come because they didn't have money. You know, there were a lot of poor Indians that didn't get help from the priests because they didn't have the money, and they weren't going to travel all that way to go and give the last rites and things like that. And so he had stories. My dad used to tell me, they fed us like pigs in troughs. Or they fed us in troughs like pigs. They would make like a big atole or something in these troughs. And Catholic, going back to school late in 33. I was done with the church. I did not want to have anything to do with it. My sisters started to go in, and I was starting to ask them questions when they would bring up the Bible and what. I'd say, well, you know, if Jesus, you know, I mean, if God had, what were those first guys that were made? Adam and Eve, and Cain and Abel, and Cain slew Abel, and then Cain went out into the land of Nod and got a wife. And my dad would say, where do you get the wife? If they're the first people made, where do you get the wife? So he was always, you know, he was always like just saying stuff like that. And so I thought, I don't know if I belong here. And besides, my parents never went to Mass. You know, and my parents never went to Mass, so, but there was something about that. Wow, God always was and always will be little girl part of me that felt something and couldn't put it in words as a little girl. I don't even know if I could put it in words now. And wouldn't you know, over the years, the people that I've studied who were quote-unquote Catholic were like Teilhard de Chardin. He was silenced. He could never write another thing or speak another thing. I studied for a while under someone they called Voodoo Joe. Oh, that's my kind of priest, Voodoo Joe. Okay. and then I'm trying to think of who else. Matthew Fox was a Catholic priest, and he wrote a book called Original Blessing. And he was quoting and writing about how Native Americans looked at original blessing. There was no such thing as original sin in our thinking. We weren't born with this awful original sin. We were born into original blessing. Oh my God, I loved everything he wrote and read, and I read it, and they silenced him. Shh, be quiet. Don't you go talking the truth to these people. They need to think that they know that if they have original sin, then they're going to need somebody to save them, right? And if they have original blessing, then they're not going to need someone to save them. So anyway, so I'm going through all this, and I'm going through philosophy classes, and finally there was a point in my life in my 30s when I was an agnostic. I was actually wondering whether there was a God or not. But I think my mother and my father's profoundly big, simple, but so big faith, kept us kids centered in that light. And I don't know how else to explain it. In 1986, and I'll hurry up with this, in 1986, I went on a pilgrimage to all the missions, to 13 missions, starting with at Sunrise in San Diego, and went on up. There were 4 of us that went. Several Californians got together, but it ended up just 4 of us. When we got to San Gabriel Mission, then a bunch of other people joined us. We had about a 3-car caravan of a lot of people. And then we went on, came up to Santa Barbara. Here in Santa Barbara, a bunch of people met us. And so, and the protest was because Junipero Serra was going to be beatified, which is the first step of making him a saint. And we were all really, really upset about that. And this book came out in 1987, The Missions of California, A Legacy of Genocide. It is definitely from a Native American perspective. That's what we need, because everything else is calling us extinct and saying that if it weren't for the priests, that we would be who God only knows where we'd be. When we ended up in Carmel, Red Sun came down 13 missions. We went up, Red Star came down 17, we came up 13. And we met at Mission San Juan Bautista. Then from there, we went to Mount Carmel. And believe me, guys, there was Secret Service people. There was police around us. They told us right away, the Indian people said, don't sign anything. But we went, and I cannot begin to tell you things that happened. I don't have time, maybe after. Miraculous, strange phenomenon. Also, too, just feeling the dead speaking to us. Don't forget us. Don't forget us. Don't forget us. And it was have a horse. I hope you're not here, but anyway, you know, right now at Mission San Gabriel, they're doing walkways. And in those walkways, every 2 feet, there's bones. And as a little, and then of course they're taking them out, putting them in these boxes or whatever. When I was a little girl, we would go to Mission San Gabriel, and we'd go out in the back. And in the back was a charnel house with those shelves of bones there. And on the top, and I'll never forget it, there were 3 skulls cemented over that doorway. And so when we went to all the missions, you felt, there were places they took us that were the cemeteries that looked like rose gardens. You would never know. You're walking through the Disneyland of the missions, because that's what they are. You heard the first speaker, Castillo, speak. Commerce, people with money, Chamber of Commerce, good tourist attraction. Let's fix them all up. And it's like you're visiting Disneyland. But the missions of California are a graveyard. And there are, my great-grandmother is buried, they capped the ground. She's buried under the parking lot at the Mission Buenaventura. There are places that you walk in San Gabriel, they're fixing the walkways now, that have remains all around there. Every 2 feet or more, there's human bodies and bones and stuff there. You're walking across them. You walk across and by these beautiful, you know, park areas with fountains and everything. Those are graveyards, mass graveyards, thousands and thousands and thousands of our people buried there. Thousands and thousands and thousands. You know, I don't even know how to begin to, I have never forgotten that pilgrimage. It was in protest, we never used the word protest. It was a pilgrimage to honor our ancestors. And of course it was in protest for the beatification of Serra. And now he's going to be canonized, you know. And I still hear those people, our ancestors, saying, don't forget us. Don't forget us. Speak up for us. We are the voice, we're the voiceless. And so I have to say today I'm not a practicing Catholic. I learned a lot of beauty there. I say I love the mystical heart of the church, of all many Christian churches, but I've been at Sikh churches and I felt the mystical heart there too. So it's like, you know, for me, the closest I am is when we have our Indian ceremonies, when we have our native ceremonies. But I never, when our people are buried, a lot of times they have Catholic services and traditional services all mixed together. And I always go up and receive communion the same way I never refuse the sacred pipe. And I don't know if any of you have been in a pipe ceremony, but do you say, oh no? No. It's like everything is holy in that way to me. And it doesn't make me, I don't know what it makes me. It makes me me. You know, that I feel welcome and I feel that I'm on a good path today. Guys, Life in California Mission, read it. I wish I had more time. I mean, there's stuff in here where they're talking about our people like as if they were psychotic, amnesiacs. They're walking around with dead eyes, you know. And this is Jean-Francois de la Peroux. And then Missionary Conquest by Tim Tinker. I'm going to be with him in June. I'm so excited. He's one of my heroes. And he said he has no doubt but that Serra had good intentions. He says, but my dad used to say, the way to hell is, I don't believe in hell anyway, but the way to hell is paved with good intentions, you know? And all of these great utopias, the Third Reich, the war, the rising of the workers of the world, and these red flags, and even ISIS in their good cars with the flags flying, and you know, so many of our young people want to go, but the underbelly of that, the underbelly of these people trying to make these utopias, which includes these missions, the underbelly of that is all the dead in our thousands of Muslims that were killed, and the thousands of the few of our people whose heads were cut off. I mean, that's the underbelly of all that utopia that sounds so great that Serra thought he was bringing here to California. That underbelly, don't forget the underbelly, don't forget the ancestors.
Thank you very much, Jordan. You sure captured a lot there. Making the comparisons at the end that you did. There's been so many efforts in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, that, and so many efforts to beat the fear of God into you and all that. It's a shame that it had to be that way. There are other ways. I know that we were talking recently with Bishop Quinn, and he said, if you study the Bible and look at how Jesus treated the Samaritans, he said that's what the missions should have did when they came to California. The lessons of Jesus are there in the Bible with the Samaritans. So there are other ways, but they just never learned that. And much to our detriment, of course. Our next speaker is Mary Valdemar. She is the co-founder of Chica in San Bernardino. And I'd like to welcome Mary.
Thank you. As I look at the audience, I just want to say I've spoken at many colleges and just all different places around the state of California, and you are truly a beautiful sight to see. And I'd like to have you give yourself a hand for being here, because you could have done a lot of things this weekend and you're here, and this is a history-making event. So thank you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here today. I'm a Catholic Chicana. I'm 6th generation Chicana, so my family's been here for 6 generations in what is so-called California, Arizona, and New Mexico. I was Catholic Youth of the Year for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I was raised Catholic in the Los Angeles area. And I especially wanted to speak on this panel because there's a lot of rhetoric going on about how there are Hispanics, Latinos, Chicanos that are supporting the canonization of Father Serra. And I talked to many people in the community, both the Chicano and Indigenous communities, and there are a lot of people that do not agree with the canonization of Father Serra. And I want you to know that, and I want to hear you represent their voice. When I was working with Catholic Youth of the Year, I got to meet Mother Teresa and Pope John Paul II. I ended up working for Catholic Charities, where I worked alongside nuns in Skid Row. And these women were the bravest, most compassionate, loving people that I've ever met in my life, dedicated to the core, to the people. And that is my impression of Catholics that I had influenced me when I was very young. Since then, I've continued to work with marginalized people, Chicanos and Indigenous communities mostly, and I believe that there's a lot of good work done within the church, but today I'm here as a critical Catholic to oppose the canonization of Father Serra. And this is really important because as people of faith, I'd like us to kind of start remembering some of the foundations of our beliefs, the things we learned as children. Many of us learned as children. The commandments, right? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And lie. Thou shalt not lie. So we're here to tell the truth today. And to remember that we are called to honor our mothers and fathers, which include all of our relatives, and of course for us, that means our ancestors. When I think of this, I can't help but to be sad because the lack of recognition and acknowledgement for how these same commandments were ignored for the indigenous people of this land. They were ignored. Every single one of these was done to our people. And it demonstrates that the church today is still unwilling to accept responsibility for its role in the sins against our culture. There's sins against our culture. Well, it's time for us to hear confession. It's time to tell the truth. The canonization of Serra, especially without the normal proof of miracles, is yet another dishonor to Indigenous people. Many of whom practice the faith, as you heard, despite already knowing the true history firsthand from their own elders. The believers that suffered most and became Catholic did so despite Serra and the missions, not because of Serra and the missions. History is not unbiased, and neither are the mission historians. They are not unbiased. We know those in power control the version of history that is allowed to be told. And I would challenge all of our Christian and Catholic brothers and sisters to go to the mission Santa Barbara on Sunday, to hear from the actual tribal members their firsthand stories of their families and their relatives, to go to them with open hearts and open minds, and be ready and prepared to tell the truth. Turning a blind eye to this issue, as the church has mistakenly done with other shameful skeletons, ultimately dishonors all of us, Catholics, Christians, any decent, compassionate, loving human being. It brings us dishonor that is still continuing. The argument I keep hearing from the church officials is that we are judging Father Serra by today's time period and not his own. This argument fails to focus on the real point. It is not about judging a man based on any time period, past, present, or future. The refusal to accept sainthood for Serra is about holding ourselves as Catholics, as Christians, accountable to tell the truth about the church's past. It's about correcting history and honoring the people among us who are most Christ-like. When I think of saints, I think of Mother Teresa. I think of Saint Francis. I think of people I have known within the church who were the epitome of love, peace, and truth, no matter what time period they were from. The protection of the vulnerable should be the main consideration, and you don't have to look hard to see how vulnerable Native people are. After losing our lives in such large numbers, after losing our land, our language, and even in some cases our entire identity. I'm one of those that lost their entire identity. 6th generation Chicana, I have no idea about any of my tribal history, and I probably never will. It's gone forever. Many saints and godly people have been able to successfully evangelize and bring people to Christ without compromising the protection of the vulnerable. Father Serra is not one of them. Many saintly and loving people of the church would rather put their own life in jeopardy than to allow human beings to be whipped or suffer violence in the name of Christ. To me, the Indigenous people who suffered within the walls of the mission are the real saints. They are the true martyrs. We can help heal the wounds of the past by confessing the truth today. But confession is not enough. We must also enact penance. We must show that we are sorry for those we harmed in action. Not by words, by action. For those of us who believe, whether Catholic or Christian or not, please join me in this penance prayer. Creator, help us honor our ancestors, our mothers, our fathers of this land by telling their truth, and offer blessings of healing, strength, compassion, and love to those who have suffered or are still suffering. As penance for the wrongs that were done to the Indigenous people, we pray for the souls of those making decisions in the name of Christianity, that you may enter their heart and fill them with empathy, understanding, and accountability for any harm inflicted within the walls of the missions. We ask you to guide all beings to your will and not to their true servants to hear and heed our united prayers. The Chicano community is united with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in this. And there are many, many Catholics who feel the same. Oh, thank you.
Are we starting something today or what? We're on our way. It's been a long time coming. Talking about the truth. Talking about the perpetrators, what they've done to us. How it's taken us a while to come together, to voice our reality, our truth, and to demand that we be listened to and to say no more. We will tell our history. We'll tell the truth. They've been incapable of doing that. Now it's our turn. Our next speaker is Dr. Donna Schindler. I know Donna quite well. She's a very good friend, and she's done a lot of good with our Alamutzin tribe, and she's done a lot of good with a number of other tribes in California and outside of California for quite a number of years. So it's my privilege to introduce Donna Schindler.
Thank you, Val. And I especially would like to thank Kareem Fairbanks, who personally invited me to come to this, and I would like to acknowledge that I am not Native American. I am of the dominant society. My heritage is Czech, Austrian. I'm from South Texas. And so I want to acknowledge right off the bat that some people may not want to hear what I have to say. And I understand that, and if you want to leave, that's fine. Totally understandable.
We love you, Donna.
Oh, thank you. You know, I learned, I lived on the Navajo reservation for 3 years, and I became the designated speaker on historical trauma to the community. And when I left there and moved back to California, it was sort of a big shock to me that when I went to talk to people who didn't know me, oftentimes they didn't want to hear it. And that was, you know, so I had to learn that lesson, and I respect that very much. So I really appreciate being invited to come and speak, and I think we really are on a roll, and I'm kind of excited. Yes, people have already talked about historical trauma, and as the morning went on, I thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to turn around and do something else, which is totally fine. There are some things I could say, but I guess one thing I want to point out is, and how I usually talk about historical trauma, is that 500 years of genocide and forced assimilation at the hands of the dominant society have left a scar on Native people throughout the world. It's called, some people call it historical trauma, historical grief, intergenerational trauma, post-colonial, post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I think the most direct and exact word for it is the soul wound. And that is what some Native elders have called it, and they've called it that for over 30 years, maybe much longer. I think the point is that a lot of Native people have known about this in their hearts, and they haven't, you know, eventually the psychologists came up with terms and started defining it and all this stuff and doing research, but Native people have known about this for a really long time. I would also like to say that a lot of Native people, while they might know about it in their hearts, they haven't put two and two together, because you know, you have to kind of think about these things. Like when I first got to the Navajo reservation, which was in 2000, I had been a practicing psychiatrist for 13 years already. So I wasn't new. I had lived in New Zealand and worked with a Maori mental health team, Oranga Hinigaro, on the North Island for 3 years, and I had worked in the Bay Area, in Oakland, California, and Berkeley for 10 years. And so I'd been a doctor for a while, and I'd seen a lot of stuff. But when I got to the Navajo reservation, within the first month, there were 4 deaths in the community from alcohol-related auto accidents, and I immediately began to think, well, why is this? Why does every single woman who come in here have the same story of domestic violence, and why is there so much suicide and homicide? And going to the Navajo Nation, actually on the plane from New Zealand to the United States, 12-hour trip, I read a book called The Book of the Navajo. It's an old book by a man named Edward Friday Locke. And in that book, it talked about how kids on the Navajo res had been taken at gunpoint and stolen from the fields and from their families and taken to boarding school. And I was reading that on the plane, and I thought, what? You know, I don't believe that. How could that be? Who would do something like that? So I got there, and I read a few other stories. I read a lot about the long walk for the Navajo, and it all sounded so brutal and so unbelievable that I got to the reservation thinking, you know, he must have made some kind of mistake. But I wasn't there very long before I started hearing stories from the people who lived there. And I heard, actually they're still alive today, a woman who, I believe she's 100 years old. She lives in the community where I do telepsychiatry still. She says that the dorm maids in the boarding schools walked around with guns, pistols in their holsters. So that's good enough for me. You know, I believed her. And of course, living on the reservation, I heard lots and lots of stories from all kinds of people. And by the time I left the Navajo reservation after 3 years, I thought, I've heard every bad story there is. You know, and then I moved to California, and